Journalism. It is the trust.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
It's very good to have you, Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, and joins us again this morning for a conversation. And how have you been?
I've been well. Actually, this year has been intense for Amnesty International, but it's a different kind of intensity. Last year was really responding to the violence around the protests. This year, of course, with June and July, things were very intense, but it's been a different kind of intensity. I think what we've seen is the funding environment for non-governmental organizations has just transformed in the last 6 months or so, 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So for many of us, actually looking at how do we continue to keep being effective with the resources that we have, and also look for new resources has been the preoccupation this year.
Yeah. Some crazy numbers and some interesting things coming out, especially yesterday. We'll look into those in just a bit, but Dennis wants to tell you about a monkey.
Yes.
A monkey.
Yeah. And we go to Congo.
A particular monkey. A Congolese monkey.
Not Curious George.
I like,
okay, not that one.
Yes. I like where you're headed. And one must say that brush looks really nice.
Thank you very much.
I would not mind having
Thank
one.
you. I knew I was coming on to Spice, so I had to dress up.
Yes, it looks really, really nice. It looks really, really nice. So
Thank you,
let's
sir.
go to Congo.
Yep.
And when you marry a monkey for its...
Sorry. Okay.
I may not be able to register this one. Should you ever want to marry a monkey, yes.
Yes. But for its money and its wealth, the money goes, but the monkey does stay.
Yeah, that's a great one. So what I'm present to there is, first of all, just the ridiculousness of marrying a monkey, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think what I'm present to is how important personal values and ethics are. Right, that the persons we marry, the people that we relate to, ultimately are their values and their ethics. And they may look shiny, they may look enticing, they may look beautiful even, but frankly speaking, once you're past the first appearance, you're now dealing with people's values.
Once you're out of honeymoon, reality check.
Yeah.
Ding! Hey, you're stuck with your monkey.
You're stuck with your monkey.
Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, so let's look at some of these things that we're being told about coming in from yesterday. A particular report that came out, and I just want to look at that just a little bit. Because we're talking about a shrinking civil space. We're talking about human rights abuses then being on a high, and we're looking at the space deteriorating in what is being called a time that wasn't expected to have been seen like this. And I just want to go into the details of that just a little bit, because we're looking at a time where people have died, extrajudicial killings on the rise, 97 deaths in just 2025 that can be attributed to extrajudicial killings, disappearances of individuals, which unfortunately sometimes, result in death. And there's some people who are still missing. And so what this is being described as is a shrinking human rights space, or a civic space that has been shrinking, and heightened levels or deterioration of the respect of human rights. It sounds bad when we use these words, but is that the reality, Rongo?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IMLU report that you're referring to is one of several reports that have come out in the last week or so. The other one was the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights that released their report on 2025, and they received 2,800 complaints from members of the public with regards to some form of violation. About 50% of those, funny enough, are not civil and political liberties issues, which is what IMLU is largely focused on.
Right.
They're more to do with social and economic rights. People who are concerned about not being able to leave hospital after treatment because they can't pay the bills and are being detained. Medical negligence issues, insurance that doesn't work. And then there are education concerns. I mean, there are people who have increasingly seen the overcrowding in classrooms, inability to be able to get support for schools. And I'm told that there is still some controversy around, I think on the front page of the Standard today, whether we're going to be able to start the year powerfully with the funding that we require. So I think the overall environment is worrying in many ways, and it seems like Kenya is on a slow burn. The figure of 97, if I look at the comparative analysis over the years, and of course one death is one death too many, so let me not belittle any of the things that have been happening. I think Missing Voices Alliance have basically spoken about, I think over the last 3 2 to 3 years, with the exception of the year of 2022, the figures have been roughly about 110, 115 deaths, extrajudicial killings. So this is kind of in that range. I think for us as Amnesty, our major concern is that we still do not see, despite the lull in the killings around protests, we are still a little bit worried about what happened in June and July, because in June and July, probably about 2/3 of what IMLU has documented took place, and that's really the 65 people who were killed during protests of that period. It was the deadliest season. That 65 is equivalent to the entire number of people who were killed in protests in 2024. So we still have a long way to go, and of course we are all keeping an eye on 2027. So thinking about what happened in June, July, and then also the by-elections give us a sense that all is not well yet.
Right.
Yeah. Houghton, when you speak about human rights, and when you started speaking, many have looked at approach of human rights when we talk about extrajudicial killings, but you have painted a picture of when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about education, and you just pause to think of, if we do not give children proper education, what are we doing to their future? If we do not provide citizens with proper healthcare, what are we doing to the quality of life and guarantees that have been given in the Constitution? We go to June, July, and the deaths that we've seen, we know we've had the compensation committee that was put in place and all that. But one asks the question, even while that is welcome, what happens to the fact that justice has to be delivered, and that we need to live in a country where respect for human rights and avoiding by all means necessary killing individuals is where we go to, other than dealing with the aftermath, because once a life is gone, can never be brought back. Are we looking at it in terms of preventative measures other than curative?
Yeah. I think one of the lessons of 2024-25 was essentially that where you see state capture of independent institutions, in the National Police Service, the Kenya National Commission, attempts to try and control the Article 59 institutions, what we call them, the level of oversight drops immediately. And once the level of oversight drops, the culture of impunity just expands, right? So you get state officers essentially thinking that they now are, investigators, prosecutors, and judges rolled up in one, and sometimes even executioners. I mean, they really, as I speak to some of the lawyers in the courts these days, and we, as Amnesty, we've been following a lot of these cases in courts. The psychosis of a state officer who thinks they have the power to be able to shoot somebody even during the funeral of one of Kenya's greatest sons is really very worrying. So I think that's one side of it, the culture of impunity. That's what drives this. The second one, of course, is corruption. And the third is really not prioritizing the futures of young people in terms of their education. I mean, there's been a lot of concern. I mean, I know one of the challenges we've got essentially is that we don't have enough resources as a result of the indebtedness, the odious debts that we've taken on over the last 10 years. And therefore, what you have is a financial crunch. It's affecting not just line ministries, but even county governments as well. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And for many of us who are looking at these trends economically, the question is 2026 going to be the year that we will default on our loans? Is that the crash? And we can only just hope that will not happen, because the results of that will be disastrous across all the social services that are just so important for our people.
In some documentation that I've read over the last couple of days, and we often see that the word progressive is used to describe jurisdictions where the people are aware of their rights and that follow those rights, to the point whereby legal processes can take place if there is an abrogation of those rights. And because of that activity, these jurisdictions are called progressive. Can we say that if there is no realization of human rights, if there is no practice of the process of ensuring those human rights, then societies cease to be progressive?
Yeah, I mean, I think if our children came home to us at the end of the term and said, "I'm progressively doing well in school, and I've gone from an F to an E," right? We might not be very, I guess, pleased. So I think we have to argue very clearly that actually there is a standard that is set by our constitution, and that standard is not just a wish list. It's not just an expectation. It is actually a legal obligation on the part of the state, and any state that is not willing to meet that standard should essentially abdicate its role and hand over to another group of leaders to be able to do that. And I think we see that in mature democracies. We see places where in the UK there was a period, I think a couple of years ago, when we had 6 prime ministers in the space of about 2 years. And that's simply because the prime minister just felt that they didn't have enough of a mandate to be able to deliver on the policies and the manifesto of that party, and therefore just stepped down. There was no confidence within the cabinet, and then you have snap elections, right? So that's how mature democracies deal with, I guess, would you say, a loss of public mandate. And I think for progressive, the language of progressive realization is very much embedded in our constitution. But, when you have numbers like close to 100 people dying, at the the hands of police officers, and let's mention it. It's not the full 110,000 police officers. This is a small number of officers who are repeat offenders. And what we have to do is we have to say that we're not progressively going anywhere. In fact, we're just backsliding.
Sure.
And the danger with that is that you then lose the expectation that anything in the Constitution will mean anything to the large number of people.
There's a bit of a worrying thing, though, because it would appear as though the majority of people, and at the risk of sounding condescending, that the majority of people do not even know that they do have human rights. Do you know what I mean? Somebody is thinking about, they're not thinking that my human rights are being abrogated when you don't use public resources to do what you're supposed to do. That I will be harassed by the police. That, that there are no, for example, public amenities like trash bins or public toilets. It doesn't come into the minds of people that this is actually against my human rights. It doesn't feature because people are struggling to eat. People are struggling to send their children to school. People are struggling to make a living. So the human right, it doesn't come into the minds of many people that this is actually something that's being done against you. How can we get to that place where we make the connection that, hang on, you can actually have a conversation about this thing, that it shouldn't be done? And I'm talking about people across the spread of Kenya, that this conversation is not in their minds. So then how can we get to a mature democracy or mature jurisdiction where there is even an understanding or comprehension of what's happening to people right under their nose?
No, I think consciousness matters, so does conviction. I mean, I think knowledge without the commitment to take action is, insufficient. Christians would say, faith without the work is nothing. I mean, a personal experience was a couple of weeks ago. I was away for a couple of days, and the community group in Kilimani, where I live, started talking about a sewer line that was being expanded, and it was happening behind people's homes. And the company that was contracted to build the sewer line had been going around to people's homes and saying that we want to connect you, or rather, let me put it this way: we want to reconnect you to the new sewer line, which is expanded. It was almost like an advert. It's going to be like much bigger and more effective. But we need you to pay 40,000 shillings for a manhole and 5,000 shillings for a connecting pipe, which is literally just less than a foot. And everybody was a bit shocked. And they said, when does Nairobi Water come round and insist that you pay for the connection, the reconnection? I came back, I engaged qua ground, as they say, and I discovered that actually Nairobi Water was not involved in this process. That this is a private contractor contracted by a building developer, and they had not followed procedure to essentially put a huge sewer line along the road reserve, across Lenana Road, and right across the front of First Community Bank. And the authorities just did not know it was happening at the time. They had been correspondence much earlier in the year, we discovered. But essentially, as I called the authorities in Dagoretti North, they were like, what are you talking about? So I had to send photographs. And what struck me with that was just how easy it is for things of a huge nature, infrastructural developments can take place without any oversight from the county government, Kura, or Nairobi Water. I reported it to the county government just a day ago, and they were horrified. And in fact, action has been taken because they didn't have enough people on the ground. So I think I tell you the story because in some ways, these are things that are very public. It's not just that somebody has been shot at night and was buried, or rather was taken to the mortuary and then buried. But you can have huge public infrastructure projects that can affect, hundreds of people very directly. You couldn't pass the road for 2 days. And we don't take action. And I think what we need to do is we need to have civic organizations continuing to educate people. Who is responsible for sewer lines? Who is responsible for streets? Who is responsible for reclamation, or rather beautification, post the evidence? And there are many other cases like that. Where do you go if your uncle has been treated in a hospital, but because Shah Shif is not working, who do you complain to? Right? How do you ensure that they're not shackled to a bed until the Harambee takes place and people are released? Right? If your child shows up to school in January and there is not enough, there's no there's no desk, there's no books, who do you complain to? And I think that's the level of culture. If we can generate that kind of a culture, then what you have is a society that's able, first of all, to understand its rights and to claim them.
Runga Houghton, you've said the Constitution has set the standard on how we should operate. As many would say, the Constitution is very clear. That statement in its own self, it's a question of reading, understanding, and knowing the standard that has been set by the Republic. So here, like the story that you've given, is a story where you go back to pre-independence and the sewer system in Nairobi was built up, the country has grown, but then there's always been the pressure, we are developing so fast, but there is no sewer system. Right. So when someone knocks at your door and tells you, we've increased the size of the sewer system and we need to connect you, it makes sense, But remember, at the end of the day,
until they tell you 40,000
until
shillings.
it tells it's 45,000 shillings. But remember, even while at that, the permits were given for this individual to construct this building. That means at that board, there's clear information on who the contractor is and everything is there because they have licenses. And one would hope that authorities that are in charge of oversight, authorities that ought to have come on the ground to ensure that everything is going to plan, are not doing their job. Those that Kenyans have donated their power to take care of them, to ensure that everything is working right, are not doing that job. Because every day, Irungu, I would not sit here and say that individuals within the county did not know. They were part of this cartel that we keep talking about on a daily basis, because majority of people who live in Kilimani, who work at county, live in Kilimani, they use the road on a daily basis. To say that they did not know will be a lie, but paints a picture of individuals that have been donated this power but do not care about the monarchy, including the rights that they have given themselves through the Constitution.
So I think there are a couple of things there. I mean, one is that, as a result of that intervention, for example, nobody on that street paid for a connection, right? Because they were connected before. They were disconnected. In fact, as I looked at one of the sewer pipes, the contractor had basically disconnected it and then put plastic bags into the pipe. So that it wouldn't disturb the sewer line they were putting in until the people paid, right? So it's almost a form of blackmail, right? But I think the other thing to recognize is that, governments, even county governments, are a bit of a behemoth. Behemoth is the English word, but they are huge. They are somewhat not very well connected. The information flows are not great, and they don't have enough eyes and ears on the ground. right? So yes, there may have been, like you say, maybe even 40, let's say 40 county government officers who passed that way, but none of them are tasked with the responsibility of essentially, overseeing the installation of sewer lines, right? So they assume that somebody else has done it. And I think that's the other culture that we have to be careful about. I mean, I think the three debilitating mindsets in the country at the moment, and I think it's also global. One is this idea of whataboutism. So whenever we bring up an issue, people say, but what about? And I realized after a while listening to this, I realized actually what people do, it's a kind of psychosis. It's a psychological way of helping you evade any responsibility to take action. Because if you can point out 6 other examples, then whoa, this problem is too big for all of us. Let's just go back to being consumers. Forget about being citizens. The second problem is this idea that somebody else will deal with it. Right? So we are not responsible 100% 24/7 for the environment around us. Our lives are getting smaller by the day, and we are really beginning to become those people that can't live. They have no responsibility for anything outside our Wi-Fi spots. Right. So if you're at home, if the Wi-Fi is working, everything is good. You can even have national and international opinions, but actually you're not taking any action. Right. So that's the second mindset. And the third one, really, I think, is this idea that somehow, if we just continue with our lives, the governance will get better. Right. And I think what we're learning is that, no, actually, the more we retreat, the more the culture of impunity and the weaknesses in our institutions begin to proliferate. And you begin to look around and think, well, actually, maybe that constitution we passed in 2010 was just a calendar. And we have another one now. Right. So I think that's the concerns that we've got. There also, I think you have to say that there are lots of incentives for people not to engage, for people not to come out of their homes and just go take a walk. Like, where is the sewer line that is, now becoming a big issue for all of us in terms of, where do we connect and the manholes and stuff like that. So I think that's the other thing is that I was at Kyoto school about 2 weeks ago to hand out prizes to all these wonderful young students there, and I made 2 points to them. I said, until human rights becomes like a toothbrush, right, like an everyday essential, then we're actually not going to see the kind of culture and the country that we want to see. And the second one was that for young people, and particularly for all people, I think if you don't know the people on your street, then actually, technically speaking, you may be on this planet, but you're not of this planet. You're displaced.
Wow. Isn't that something?
Isa Kale earlier told us that you were at Kyoto School and you say hi because you handed over 4 trophies.
Oh, is it?
To his son?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. So he just said that
it was a wonderful moment, actually, just watching those young kids.
But Irungu, why do you think there is a sense of we do not care, it's their problem? Why is there a sense of, when we talk about human rights, one would ask, there's always this argument that whenever there is, say, a protest and there is confrontation between protesters and police, you'd hear when Kenyans have been killed, protesters have been killed, one would just wake up and say, when you throw a stone at a police, what do you expect? You think that rifle or bullets are flowers. They will use it against you. When you attack a police officer, what do you think they would do? They will have to fight back. Even if someone threw a stone and you have a gun and bullets, one asks the question, does it warrant killing someone using a gun, and police officers with the training that they go through and the curriculum that they go through, how they trained to measure or gauge on when to use guns? But even then, you look at, like you say, June and July being the epicenter of what went through the country, and Kenyans were killed for having a flag, water, and handkerchief. And one asks the question, it seems as if killing has become so easy that we do not care. I was having a conversation with one of our senior head of cameraman here in Standard, and says, back in the days, it would be a big story when a single life was taken in Kenya. Today, 4 people would die and it has become normal. It has been normalized that it only becomes a big story when you have hundreds and hundreds of people that are dying. Yet in this same country, a single life being taken away would be a national story. Have we reduced ourselves to a point where loss of life is just a cup of tea?
So in all societies where there is kind of like a chronic slide towards either violence or insecurity or authoritarianism, what we know from kind of the studies is that people find ways of adjusting, right? It's a little bit like, with the economy. As our incomes begin to shrink with inflation of commodities that are important to us or services that we need, we begin to think kind of like in this Kadogo economy mindset, right? So you downscale, right? You adjust. And one of the things that, Martin Luther King used to say is never adjust to oppression, right? Never adjust to, economic decline. You need to rise and challenge it, right? Because ultimately what happens is you will see yourself become smaller and smaller by the day. And I think that's part of the dynamic, is that we are all adjusting and we're numbing ourselves just because the pain of, watching, Denzel Omondi's parents or Rex Masai's parents have to go to court, basically looking for justice. Or we wonder what happened to Bridget Wainaina, the young girl, the 12-year-old girl in Kiambu who was shot in her home, not on a protest. What happened to that level of anguish? And I think that's a very natural human response. But I think it's important to recognize that actually it does not fix the problem, right? So this December, we've just published Lest We Forget Chapter 2. And this is essentially a series of testimonies of family members of people who died over 2025. And it includes people like Vincent Otieno, who was shot through the head while he was seated waiting for a chance to see his leader, Raila Odinga, for the last time in that stadium, So it is important, I think, for us to continue to memorize people, because you realize that actually, this does matter. And like, I think the families of many of the people that have been, killed this year, they never thought they would have to bury their loved ones, right? So the message I send back to people is there is no comfort in this idea that, somehow this will not affect me. Right? We know for a fact, for example, in 2024, there were many young people who were the children of members of parliament who were voting in the National Assembly. We know that there were children of police officers who were in the streets. We know that there were, cabinet secretaries. Children were in the streets. And that's why it was just so important for organizations like Amnesty and others to make sure that actually the use of excessive and disproportionate force was not used against protesters, not just simply because they were the children of the 5% of the population, but because they were everybody's children.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's I think, the framework. What we've seen in other countries now, if we think about Tanzania, for example, and 2 days ago, we held our breath because given what we saw on the 29th of October, in those 3 days, the Suluhu administration probably has killed somewhere in the range of anywhere between 1,000 to 3,000 human beings over a 4-day process. Now, if you put that into context, let's take the upper level. And again, because of the internet shutdown, there's no official independent verification of how many people died. That's probably twice as many people who died during the post-election violence in 2008.
Yes.
It is more people that have died in the entire period of the NRM government in Uganda. Those 4 days, right? So I think the other thing to think about is, yes, we have these slow, I guess, kind of chronic slides that come in the Kenyan context. But I think for places like Tanzania, you can see a spike that can actually not only just kill large numbers of people, but it can actually erode the concept of electoral democracy. And it's important for us because, it's not just, some people have been saying, and it's said lightly, but it actually has quite a lot of power, that, Tanzania was the quarterfinals, Uganda is the semifinals, Kenya will be the finals. there are a couple of things with that which we can push a little bit. One is that it's not just Uganda that's having elections in January, but next year we've got South Sudan and Ethiopia, right? And secondly, the other thing about this is that the challenge is not just in terms of the toll, in terms of lives. It's also about whether electoral democracy actually is a viable way of choosing leaders, right? Because we get to a point where you either have an election, which is bound by laws, or you have an auction where essentially the political class that have either stolen or earned large amounts of money just buy voters. And the third one is an insurrection, right? Those seem to be the three options
right now,
unfortunately.
Sadly.
I vote for the first one. My voice is I just have one vote. Yes.
And if we look at the practice, and it's not just, like you say, it's across countries. If you look at the practice, that at the end of an election, the complaints that we get, whether it is contestation, whether it is, conflict as a result of it, or all-out war because of what has happened during an election, seems to be the modus operandi. So how do we get to the place whereby we're thinking differently? And folks have said often that it is through education that I go to China and I think about the times when we read of Chairman Mao, who inculcated a way of life into people's minds and into people's hardware, into people's software and into people's network. And this was in schools, that Chinese children grew up knowing a certain ideology and practicing it, living it, breathing it until they grew up. And so whether it was indoctrination, whether it was a way of life, what happened after that is that then when governments and individuals would come together to talk about a certain thing, it was then easy for the people to pick it up because they started from when they were young. Is there a case to be made for some of these things that we speak about to be linked to an education system from the very beginning, for children to understand that your rights are your rights and that you can push for those rights under a constitution, which is the umbrella law of any land? Is it time? Is Kenya at the point where it can start to think around that, or are we still dealing with who would win an election for us to be a little bit more mature about what we can do when it comes to practice of rights?
Yeah. No, I'm a great fan of civics, and one of the things going back to that experience with the Kyoto school was, I said to them, the home is the first classroom. Right? And the other part of that is that, if you are not careful in terms of how you, manage the information that comes to your child, your children's first teachers might end up being WhatsApp and TikTok, right? So I think it's important that we actually intentionally think about what are the national values under Article 10 of the Constitution, or the section that talks about the values of democracy, the values of ethics, the values of human rights and justice and so on, and actually invest in them. And there's just too little investment in that side of things. I've often thought that, half of our problems, the challenges that we have in this in our country, really stem from the lack of investment in terms of public participation. And one of the things that I'm hoping will happen in the next the next season of the Parliament, when they reopen, is the passing of the public participation bill, because I think it will create a framework within which we can expect government to, when they are introducing policy changes, that they actually come intentionally to consult with us. I mean, the US-Kenya deal, the health deal, which has caused so much of a debate over the last 1 week, now we've finally seen the documents, and the documents that we've seen are not as bad as the earlier drafts that we were all concerned about. But the fact of the matter is that there was hardly any, no public participation on the process. And one would assume that, if the state operates in an open, transparent way, then half of the tensions that come after the passing of the policy will not be there.
Right. I'm sorry. And just to think about what kind of precedent then could be set on some of these things when we talk about, yes, okay, we can bring it up in our families and have these conversations. My mind goes back to a few years ago when the famous case of George Floyd in the US, where literally his neck was, trampled on. And because of the pictures and the public outcry, there's a man behind bars today, a police officer who before that had sworn that he hadn't done anything wrong, but that the courts found differently. I'm not going to focus on that, but what happened after that, as a result of that, is that then we see, maybe we perceived, that United States police officers then were a little bit more cautious or careful about how they operated after that. So precedent was set, and in a way in which it was never done before. Do we need a precedent setter, especially when it comes to these numbers that we're talking about, whether it's 1 or 97, whether it's 1,000 or 1,000,000? That if you know that the law or the power that has been put in your hands is not for abuse but for use, if there's a precedent setter where it's very clear that you cannot do this, I think about Albert Ojwang, who till today we don't know. I think about Brian Odhiambo, who we don't know if KWS killed him or not. I think about, and this is just this year, if somebody was to pay for what they did, would it set precedent about then how human rights are respected and or kept in country?
I mean, I think ultimately, if there are no consequences for breaking the law will be broken infinitum. It will continue and continue and continue. And I think what is really critical in these kind of cases is making sure that there is swift investigations, that the prosecution happens quickly, and that you have essentially protection for the witnesses, the forensic evidence is secured, and the families get independent counsel. Right, so this is the model that we've been using. The challenge of, I think the challenge we've seen, particularly from the 2024-25 period, and potentially even the 2023 period, is that the cases are essentially investigated by IPOA. A fraction of those cases get to court. And the weakest link, unfortunately, has been the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. There are too many cases that have got stuck in the offices there that have just not moved to prosecution, and therefore the judges cannot take action. They cannot even sit on those cases. I don't know if you remember the Masimba killings a few years back. This was a community that got very angry and blocked a road, and I believe 10 people were killed that day. That case was investigated. IPOA essentially recommended that charges be placed against police officers. The ODPP declined and said, no, this is not sufficient. Let's go to an inquest. The inquest took place. 3 years later, the inquest has just come back and said, as far as we can see, there is a case to answer, and we have the suspects. Now, 3 years have lapsed since that period, right? The anguish of that community is just unimaginable. And I think that's the work that human rights organizations have to do, is to try and shorten the period between essentially a violation and justice. That's our job. And in the case, you mentioned the panel of experts on the compensation. There's a degree of truth to that, which is that you can't compensate a life like in a straight transactional analysis. All you can do is symbolically declare that you are responsible, as a state, for having taken that life, and essentially provide reparations. Right? And what was being attempted in the panel of experts was to try and short circuit the 7 years that usually it takes for somebody whose rights have been violated, to the point at which they can get a court determination for compensation, and simply say, if the state is willing to acknowledge that this person, Rex Masai, for example, was shot in a circumstances in which there were police officers on an operation, without finding criminal culpability in that process, we can compensate that family. But the thing that's really important about the panel of experts, which of course now is still stayed, there's been a good development, I think, in terms of the balanced judgment that came out of Kerugoya just this week, which essentially was to say that the best place for this work to take place is under the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And as a member of the panel, I agree with that. Right? In fact, my public message over the weekend was that the state should not appeal that decision, and furthermore that they should not take their foot off the pedal to try and bring this to a close, because that's the danger, right?
You see, Houghton, there is bodies that have been placed and have been given power by the Constitution to protect the law. you speak about police, what's their role to maintain law and order, and protect human life as well. They've been donated that power by Kenyans to take care of them, It is only a police officer holding a gun who, in a time when they have to use that gun, they will use it under the law, And there is also the aspect of uneasyism, at leastism, that exists in this country. So here is a question where human rights have deteriorated over time, but you'd find someone sit and say, at least we're not like Tanzania.
Yeah.
At least we're not
Maybe
like
this is the fifth
Uganda.
mindset that I think I left out.
At least we're not like so and so. And through this ism that continues to creep onto Kenyans, many have forgotten on what their role is in being part and parcel of the conversation and ensuring that the law is not a suggestion, that the law is protected and that everyone plays under that right. So let's talk about the police. They know what they need to do. There's a reason why you go to Kiganjo for 9 months. You are taught on how to protect this law, how to use this gun, and even how to take commands. But at the end of the day, you find they become tools for hire by the political class. He who gives much will always call the shots. I'm sorry to say that. Then we have Kenyans who will always say, Mimi, when it comes to demos, Irunga Houghton and crew can go, I fear dying. At least they can fight for us. Us, we can just chill at home and follow that on TV. Comment on the need of those with responsibility of maintaining law and order, police, to ensure that they do that on a daily basis, that the government ensures that the police have the independence that they have, and that it is also not they are independent when we are campaigning, but it is a lived experience that Kenyans have to see as well.
Yeah. I mean, let me go, before I come to the essence of your question, let me start with the first one, which is this idea that somehow we are exclusive and that we are really we're the clean ones in a dirty neighborhood. And I think it's such a false analysis. I used to still meet a number of diplomats that come into the country. And as we're describing what's happening in Kenya, often I see them begin to do screensaver looks, right? So, and I can see that they're like, yeah, I hear, Mr. Amnesty, this is, there are some problems here. But, if you just look at our neighbors, right, that's where the intention of the embassy needs to be focused. So I started arguing, after seeing this as a pattern, I started thinking, well, maybe actually what I need to do is I need to anchor them in our constitution, because without our constitution, everything collapses, right? And it's the same thing for Uganda, Tanzania, and Eritrea, and Ethiopia, that the constitutional order, the legal framework, is what's critical and a starting point. So stop comparing us to our neighbors and start comparing us to the standards set by the Constitution. Now, what's interesting in your comment is that Kenyans are behaving like diplomats, almost like people coming to the country for the first time and saying, whoa, I know things are bad, but let's not think about what's happening next door. We're doing so much better. As Amnesty International, we try not to compare, right? Because a death is a death is a death, right? It's critical that we do not get into this idea of some kind of economic analysis on one hand, the other hand, and so on. But just to be very clear, factually, what's happening against the constitutional order. Let me come to your point about police officers. I mean, I think the thing, that I speak to police officers very regularly. The thing I remind them is, first and foremost, they're human rights defenders.
Yes.
They are essentially even more mandated than an Amnesty International, a Muhuri, a Vocal Africa, an IMLU, a Kenya Human Rights Commission, than we, in terms of protection of human rights. Yes. They have a mandate that comes from laws. There is no law, there's no constitution that says Amnesty must do X, right? They are mandated by law. So that's the first place. The second one is a moral obligation, right? An ethical obligation. As a professional, your job is crime detection and security for all people, right? So if I can speak to as a professional, right? And I know there are some people who would argue the police officer is not professional, but they are. They are. It's a profession. People choose that profession, right? And I think as we would say to teachers, you can't, train as a teacher and then decide you don't want to teach. You can't be a doctor and decide in the surgery room, I don't feel like, I'm not feeling it today, right? There is, as we say, there is no otherwise, right? You are a professional. That is your job. If you don't like the job, then go teach, go medicate, go support other people in different ways. So there is no, I guess, exit for that. And I think the key thing that we have been saying is that, where you do your work well, you must be compensated well. You must be rewarded well. We saw this week the return of police officers from Haiti.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we were quite critical 3 years ago. We didn't think that the mission was well anchored. We were worried about the funding that was there. We worried about, what do
Their
you do?
lives.
Their lives. And, how do you operate in an environment where you don't even speak the local language, right? Now, of course, Benedict Washira didn't make it back. Right?
Yeah.
He was the officer that was announced to the country as the officer that had gone missing. But many of them did come back, and I kind of wondered, in some ways, what would that have been? What was that experience like? And I do hope that they will write and talk about their experiences. But ultimately, I think the greater story is that I do progressively believe, based on the information that we've had, is that they played a role in protecting the rights of Haitians, right? So in that sense, despite the criticism, despite the concerns, many of them have come back, and many of them, have provided to some stability in the Haitian side. But unfortunately, they come back with great uncertainty about who's going to take over that role. Right? So they may have held the ground, but the ground is not solid yet.
It's just painted an amazing picture of these officers who went to Haiti. They are the same police officers. They come from the AP unit, right? Which is just another arm of the police, not military. And these are individuals who went to a troubled country and protected lives, property of the people of Haiti. That means we have a professional police officers who, if allowed to just do the policing, they will take care of Kenyans, Pastor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the officers I've met are like that. Their history was, the family, there was their father was a police officer, a member of their family was a police officer. They've always admired the uniform. They've had this wish to be able to protect people. Those are the police officers that need to be promoted into positions. Some of them are very angry with the kind of instructions that they receive. Others are more worried about, breaking the law and then being left in a courtroom alone, right? And often, what they say is that, in that moment, we might get, a legal officer from Vigilance House, but ultimately we are alone, carrying a cross that we thought was somehow policy, right? So I think one of the things that we have to do is to make sure that their right, that the independence that is enshrined in the Constitution is protected. It's essentially not allowed to slide into this weaponization that we've seen in the last few months. Secondly, I think the other thing, hopefully going forward in 2026, is that we will not see parallel informal units. I think we've been very concerned about multi-agency task forces that don't seem to have clear lines of command. Particularly in the surveillance work, that they've been doing using technology. We've been very worried about the abductions. We've been very worried about the use of non-uniformed and unmarked vehicles, because essentially that is the slide to a different constitutional order or disorder, if I can put it that way. Which, of course, we saw take place in Tanzania, to the extent that there were very many rumors that actually at some point Tanzanian sovereignty was breached by the presence of Ugandan military personnel, in which case then the question is, have you lost everything? Have you lost the ability to be able to hold an international, an Independence Day celebration? Have you lost the ability to be sworn in as a president in the public? Have you lost the ability effectively to be able to govern a country? And that's the danger of, crippling electoral processes, that actually citizens don't feel like they have a choice. All your opposition candidates are, behind bars being charged with treason. And ultimately, everything that you thought you were pulling together to try and stay in place is actually just a slide towards authoritarianism and insecurity. Indeed. And how do you govern like that?
Yeah.
That we have these conversations, that we can continue to put these things in the limelight, is one of the things that pushes the needle. that we say, why do we keep talking about it? But if we don't, then that we don't make it clear that we are aware. And that to make one more person today aware of what some of these conversations are, I think is a marked progression in that journey. Thank you for never being silent about these things, and thank you for continuing to come and have these conversations with us that with the needle moves every time you do.
Thank you very much.
Irongo Houghton is the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, has been with us this morning. And hopefully that space widens. It's been shrinking. It must widen.
It must widen.
It must widen. 8:02. Good morning.
The latest news from around the world. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.